honored today to welcome 3 Vietnam veterans who will speak to us about their experiences during the war and bring us up to date on the status of the new Vietnam War Memorial opening in 2026. First up, we have Jim Askins. Jim was a captain in the U.S. Marine Corps. He flew F-4 Phantom fighter attack aircraft. James flew 210 combat missions in Vietnam and was awarded the title Top Gun for superior achievement in aerial competition. He will speak today on how the military has evolved to integrate women pilots and why he believes this progress strengthens our armed services. Next, we'll hear from Councilman Rainey Champagne. From 1963 to 1967, he served as a U.S. naval officer aboard a warship, a destroyer, and completed 2 tours of duty in the Vietnam War zone. Our last speaker, Terry Kehoe, was drafted into the Army in 1969. He graduated as a sergeant. In 1970, he was assigned to Vietnam as a scout dog handler, assigned to Prince, his German Shepherd partner, and they walked point for various combat units in the jungles, hills, and rice paddies. Our veterans will share with us tonight, speaking for about 10 to 15 minutes, and we ask that you please hold all of your questions until the end of the presentation. First up, Jim Askins.
Thank you, and hello everybody. It is the 250th anniversary of the United States Marine Corps today, so we'd like to honor them. I'm asked to talk about the evolution of the military bringing women into the cockpit. Evolution is not quite the word. The military was brought kicking and screaming to bring women into it. It took a lot of activities, actions by the women during the course of 100 years to really get equality in the armed forces. The women have been in aviation since the start. Catherine Wright was the sister of Orville and Wilbur Wright. The Wright brothers were very shy, and she was the only one that really could talk to the public. She handled the business affairs, she handled the PR, and she responded to the scientific inquiries, and she did the snoozing. Wilbur was so shy he hardly talked in public. As Catherine said, Wilbur and Orville are not the type of men that one wants to bring to dinner. Anyway, the first women wanted to fly almost immediately in combat. And at the start of World War I in 1917, Ruth Law and Marjorie Stinson both volunteered to fly. They petitioned the president, Woodrow Wilson. The response from the Army was pretty much, here's a quote from Secretary Baker, "We don't want to let down the bars to let women in the Army." Ruth Stinson, Ruth Law at that time was probably one of the best known aviators in the nation. She held a number of distance and altitude records and time records. These are national records, better than anybody else. The Stinsons started one of the first flight schools in the United States. In fact, in 1915, Marjorie Stinson was contracted to teach Royal Air Force pilots from Canada how to fly in combat. And so by the time they applied for the position to be in the Army's new Air Wing in 1917, they were very experienced. They were training male pilots for combat, and the military said, no, you can't join the Army. What they could do, though, Marjorie Stinson did continue training men for the service, and they were restricted, though. She couldn't train them on a military base because she wasn't in the military. They had to train in a private field, and the Ruth Law ended up doing exhibitions for fundraisers for the Red Cross and the Liberty Bond programs. But no women were really let into the services to fly until the 1970s. In World War II, necessity brought women into flying. The WASP were formed, and this was a group of women that were trained to fly every military aircraft that there was. They flew B-17s, they flew fighter jets, or the fighter prop planes, everything. But in 1943, there were 25,000 women that applied for the position of a WASP, and of that, 1,800 went into training, and out of that, another 1,000 actually got their wings. And over the next 2 years, 1943 and 44, they flew over 60 million miles. And their accident rate was virtually the same as the male pilots in the Army Air Corps. The one area where they were better than the male air was where it was pilot error that caused the accident. They were better than that rate. And the WASPs served for 2 years. They flew everything. In fact, towards the end of 44, Colonel Tibbets, or Lieutenant Colonel Tibbets, the man who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, was tasked with training crews to fly the B-29. And the B-29 was a brand new bomber. It was heavier and bigger than anything they'd flown in the military, and it had been rushed in to perform its fly. And so there wasn't really much testing of it, and so the men were somewhat afraid to fly it. And what he did was he went and asked 2 of the better-known WASP pilots to come and fly the B-29. He gave them each 3 days of training, and after that, they ferried these crews that were reluctant to get into the B-29 around the Southwest, which proves, I think, that you may not be able to convince a man with logic, but you can by using his ego. After the 44, the pipeline had gotten to the point where there were sufficient men to fly all of the billets that they had. So the WASP were disbanded. The women were sent home. They had to pay their own ways home. They were given no VA benefits, and the 38 women who were killed in serving as WASP, their families got no burial benefits. So in 1948, finally, the services started the integration of women into the services. And in 48, they also did a combat restriction provision of their service. So women could be in the service, but they could not be in combat, they could not be in combat areas. Eventually that changed in the 70s, so they could fly combat support, or do combat support missions, but they couldn't actually be in combat themselves. And this only came about because the women sued the United States government. 6 of the women aviators, actually 6 of the naval officers, sued in court saying it was unconstitutional to restrict women to just hospital and transport ships. And they won the lawsuit. And so women could now go into those areas and fly what they called beyond logistical support vessels. And so that's where it started. The feelings about women in flying began to change a little bit. In the 70s, they first started to get their wings. The first women were in 1974 in the Navy. Then by 77, the Army and the Air Force had added women to flying. Marine Corps, we were a little later, 1993. So they started flying, and they could fly everything, but they could not fly in combat aircraft. And eventually that started to change, and it started to change in 1991 with the revelation that women flying these support missions were also in combat theaters and were threatened. And so there's risk rule that governs where they could fly was really not being applied. During the Operation Desert Storm, it became apparent that women were at risk in combat. And there was a Major Rossi who flew for the Army. She was interviewed on CNN, and she flew helicopters, commanded a helicopter squadron, not a squadron, but a company. Not sure, I wasn't in the Army, so I'm not sure what a helicopter company was, but that's what she was commanded by. She was interviewed on CNN about her position in the Army and what she was doing over there in operation. At the time it was Desert Shield. 2 weeks later, she was flying a night mission in bad weather, and she ran into a micro tower that was not lit and was killed. And that was very publicized at the time. And then there was a female flight surgeon that was captured in Iraq, and that became very public. In total, 5 women were killed during the Iraq War in 1991. So in 1991, Ted Kennedy and Senator Roth from Tennessee introduced an amendment to the Defense Bill of 92 that would allow women in combat. And that bill passed, but it almost didn't pass because of the opposition of Senator McCain and Vice President Cheney to it. and they had their reasons for it, but it got through only because the women had been organizing all along in their history. All of the women organizations had gotten together, and the call went out when it was apparent that this was not going to pass because the Senate Armed Services Committee said we shouldn't pass this bill. But what happened was that all of the WASPs who had their uniforms, all of the active duty military, everybody came down to Washington, they organized, they went and saw the congressman, and they got the bill passed. In fact, it was against the law for a military person to lobby Congress in a uniform. They said they weren't lobbying, they were just educated. In any event, we'll talk a little bit about how it was for me. I flew back in 1969, 68, 70s, and as you know, the Marine Corps didn't have women in aviation until '93, so we really didn't think much about women being in our squadrons. But if we did, then we thought, they're not as good as us, they can't be as good as us, they can't pull Gs. Gs are what you do when you're pulling off of targets. The standard pull-off in a 45-degree bombing run is 5.5 Gs, so my 20-pound arm now weighs 110 pounds. You do need strength, and you have to be able to pull Gs to turn tight. And the more you can turn, the more Gs you can pull, the more you can turn. Well, that was sort of the thought. The main other thought was camaraderie is going to be destroyed. Men are going to be protective of women. Those were sort of what went through everybody's head, but we really didn't think about it because it wasn't really on the horizon. And I thought they put the women in the centrifuge. There was a rumor that they just couldn't pull as many G's in centrifuges. Now, nobody was checking the internet in those days. And I checked it for this out, and what I found out was it wasn't true. This is all fake news. And I went back for the 50th reunion of my fighter squadron at Buford, and the fighter squadron was now flying F-18s, but they had 3 women pilots in their fighter squadron. And they went over their missions, and we told war stories with the O Club, and the thing was that the camaraderie was there. And it all boiled down to a good stick is a good stick. It was the flying that made the difference. And so it's really important, that people can be given an opportunity to demonstrate what they can do. And that wasn't happening, and it didn't happen for a long time in the military until basically people organized and advocated and sued to get it. So, I admire the way you people are working this environment here. It's a tough environment, and it's discouraging at times. It is often one step forward and 2 steps back. And right now, there's 1 step forward, we're in the 2-step back range with our military. The Trump administration has eviscerated senior women military leadership. And I want to read just some names about what has happened here. Since Trump has come back into office for the 2nd time, the Commandant of the Harvard Coast Guard was fired after she'd only been in her position for a few hours. The Naval Academy superintendent was transferred from a very visible position as head of the Naval Academy. This was a position where the junior people that were coming in, that were going to become officers and be the heart of the Navy, saw a woman in a strong leadership position. She was moved to be called a lateral move, or maybe even a slight promotion, but it was out of the limelight. She was no longer visible. The Admiral Franchette, who was the first female chief of naval operations, was removed. Air Force General Jennifer Short was removed. Vice Admiral Shoshana Churchfield was removed. She was the only flag officer female on the NATO committee. Right now, there are no women in any other military services of a 4-star rank. None.
What?
Yes, none. And there are no women under consideration in the 3- and 4-star promotion boards at this moment. So he has eviscerated those women. I'll read this one for you too. It's a quote from Leon Panetta, who was Secretary of Defense and who was the one who actually cleared off the women for the final steps in participation in combat. He said,
removal of the officers without cause sends a message. It wasn't about merit. It is not about performance. It's because they are women. The Navy's, or the military's response, Department of Defense, or Department of War, as Kath wants to call them, their response was why these people were removed, and they often weren't given a reason for it other than DEI was the hint. You know, the Chief of Naval Operations pushed DEI too much. General Short was a DEI hire, they said. Anyway, under the leadership of Secretary Hitchstaff, the Department of Defense no longer makes personnel decisions on the basis of sex. Promotions, reassignments, and removals are all decided on the basis of merit and overall performance. That was the military's response to what's happening now. So it's not a battle that's going to be won easily, and it's not a battle that's over. It's there right now. You have a call to action. And you guys have been very good at turning out people for performances like the No Kings rallies. Thomas Jefferson was really concerned about the lack of participation or the dying of participation by people in a democracy. He called it electoral despotism. That was a possibility. And a despotism is someone who rules unilaterally, who doesn't govern by the Constitution, who doesn't play by the rule of law. And that's what he worried about, that people aren't going to show up. There's a quote that's attributed to him that really isn't his, and it says, "Democracy crumbles when a person thinks their voice is too small to be heard." And that's not true. You've got to be, well, that statement is true, but what is not true is that your voice is not too small. You've got to turn out for these things. You've got to keep coming back to these, because action is all that's going to satisfy things. Thank you.